I think it's ruined. I don't know what to do. I might need to start over. Shit. As musicians, we live and breathe through our instruments. When we're not able to play, we're probably thinking about music, thinking about playing music, or thinking about gears and instruments related to our music. As an electric guitar enthusiast, I thought the best way to get closer to the instrument was to make one myself. So that's what I did. Many years ago, I began the process with the help of one of my school teachers, a software development teacher too, who'd have thought, and wow, was it a learning process. It certainly drove home that old concept of defining setbacks versus failures, and how the main difference between the two is how you react to the obstacles in front of you. Like sometimes things are just and all you can do is acknowledge it and try and think of the best way forward. So this is the end result of the process that started years ago, back when I was in high school. I want to emphasize here that this build is proof that anyone can build a guitar with the right help, time, and tools. It's absolutely not a professional's guide on how to do things, and I'm sure if any luthiers watch this, they're going to absolutely cringe at some of the things I've done. But the point is that you can make a wonderful looking, durable, and great playing guitar without all those years of experience under your belt. So it started as many projects do, with some ideas jotted down on pencil and paper. I used my graphic design prowess to try and replicate this digitally using Microsoft Paint, and once I was happy, went off to the local hardware store to purchase some wood for the body. Yes, tone wood purists. I think this guitar ended up sounding fantastic, despite the fact that I built it with 2 pieces of wood that totaled 75 Australian dollars from Bunnings. The body here is Queensland maple, which is just a common, bland, unremarkable wood, but hey, it gets the job done. Unfortunately, I don't have any recorded footage of the wood cutting process. I wasn't thinking much about making videos back in school, and I was also using 100% of my brain power trying not to lose a finger on all of that machinery. But there's plenty of footage of the next step, so don't worry. So the next task was to cut out a template on a thin sheet of wood. This would serve as a guide for the body shaping tasks, and was where I had to finalize the shape. I reduced the amount of work ahead and risk of self-injury drastically by reducing the number of edges by a healthy degree. And this thin layer on top here was the design that I settled on. Using a bandsaw on a bench, I cut out as close as I comfortably could to the template. Look at all the scrap wood here. And then I used a combination of sanding with a wall-mounted electric sander and routing with a hand router to make the body match the template exactly. Here you can see each round of routing show up as various layers across the body. And then one more round of sanding helped get rid of those outside lines and make the wood feel uniform to the touch. I also designed and made a rough draft of my own guitar neck, with some sanding left to do to get the neck shape right, and I bought an ebony fretboard off eBay to go along with it. But then things changed when my family and I moved. We were now much further away from the school, and with university on the horizon, my thoughts shifted far away from this electric guitar build. I bought a hand router and added this neat little bevel around the outside, but other than that, I made no progress for well over a decade. I simply lacked the tools to complete the next steps, which are about routing cavities for the pickups, the electronics compartment, your input jack, and your neck pocket. So those years passed, and I made no progress. I'd think about the neck and body wood sitting somewhere in the garage and feel that pressure to take the plunge and get those next steps going, but then I'd plan out all the steps, feel like it was too much, give up, and then get distracted with something else. Then at one point I actually noticed that the neck that I'd made had completely rotted away. It was weak, it was fragile, it was covered in mold, and it ended up being unusable for this project. I was actually very lucky that the body wood managed to survive all that time, and once I noticed that the neck was in bad condition, I made sure to keep the body wood indoors and somewhere protected from the elements. But towards the end of 2023, I made a choice. You see, as a time-poor adult, I could leverage that thing I spend my day-to-day on, working for money, to enlist the help of someone to complete the tasks that I currently didn't have the tools for. Project management, delegation of duties, and all that other fun work stuff. I'd also changed taste significantly since high school. I no longer wanted EMGs, a Floyd Rose, or 7 strings on this guitar. There simply wasn't enough space for the 7 string on the guitar. It made the body look small and weird. I just didn't like it. In school I actually didn't have a 7 string and I really wanted one, so I was willing to forego some of the aesthetic reasons to not put a 7th on it. But now that I've got quite a few 7s, it made sense to stick with the 6. So I purchased new hardware, including this beautiful top, which I actually got off of Etsy from a shop called Quality Tone Woods. I got some gold hardware in terms of the pickup selector and these abalone top knobs. I got a gold hip shot bridge. Absolutely love the hip shot hardware. I got 2 Seymour Duncan pickups instead of EMGs. I got the Distortion and the JB4. I got a Graphtec Tusk nut and gold locking tuners to complete the look. Also, since I was down a guitar neck, I actually looked on eBay and found a shop selling a Jackson style reverse headstock with shark fin inlays and a rosewood fingerboard for like 70 Aussie dollars. So I thought I'll cut this corner, buy that, see if it works, and only look into making a new neck from scratch if this one's a total failure. But turned out to be pretty good. I also enlisted the help from a local luthier to cut the remaining cavities. He also managed to match this top wood to the body shape that I had, thanks to the template that I still also had. So here's what I'd completed up to on the left, and on the right is after the luthiers cut out the pockets and aligned the top. Now for the finishing process. Honestly, I know it's called finishing because you're touching up the aesthetic parts, this is the final step, and this is what the customer's gonna see, but finishing took me longer than actually cutting out the bodywood and shaping of the guitar itself. I now have a massive respect for guitar painters, finishers, whatever you want to call them. All the people who are responsible for making sure the guitar looks professional before it goes out to the market. So to begin with, I sanded down the body with 120 grit paper once, then 220. After that, I sprayed some water to raise the wood grain and continued sanding with 320 and 400 grit papers. And don't mind the red on my hand, I've been practicing using dye on scrap wood, which I highly recommend so that you have a good idea of what your final product would look like before you actually try applying it to your base bodywood. I also spent some time hand sanding down edges that'll contact me while playing, such as that neck heel when playing leads, the bottom edge that'll sit on my leg, and the much needed belly cut. While there's definitely a lot of information on the net about sanding wood and guitar bodies, there's not much about dealing with resin. One thing I learned here was while wet sanding, the resin doesn't actually take in any of the water, obviously, so I had to dab that dry before continuing with the sanding process. So while the dry wood feels flat after sanding, spraying with water made it clear that there were still some bumps in the grain. We don't want those bumps there at all, and since the dye itself will have moisture in it, it's best to sand that flat in a wet state so that you know it'll be flat when you're done painting. So at this point, I'm taping up the edges of the guitar so that the black burst doesn't spill onto the bevel. Here's my intended design, and to achieve this, I've got to be extra careful to make sure the tape is firmly applied at all points along the top bevel. Time to dye the top wood. I'm using Angelus leather dyes here for both the red and black colors I used on this build. And we start by shaking up the bottles, applying some on a clean, plain cloth, and then applying it onto the body. These dyes are quite easy to use, and you can go over the colors a few times with a blending technique to get the look you want. It's very forgiving. So I'm going over the black borders to get a firm line at the edges, and then blending the red into the black with subsequent passes over the instrument. This helps make it look like it's going from red to black and vice versa to get that blend going instead of having two separated layers of color. One other thing, it's good to use separate cloths for each color. Here I'm using one for the black dye, one for the red dye, and one for the mix. At this point, I'm pretty happy with the look. It is a little dark though, so I decided to sand away some of the areas with the nicer wood grain to it to help make it look like the grain is popping. Some light sanding to reintroduce that natural wood color really makes the wood look like it's shining through and add some depth to the finish. And for the resin, well, just like the water, this doesn't absorb any of the dye, so the mix of the black and the red looked a little weird here. I made sure to go over it again with some more red to get the color right. Yeah, now it's really coming together. Time for the back. I was initially planning on just a plain black back, but then after looking at some other cool builds, and actually my very own check to Cygnus, I thought that a bit of sanding to show the natural wood grain would look cool. Bit of a faded, worn look for the back. This involved many coats of the black dye, and honestly I really should have grain filled the back first to reduce the amount of dye needed. And after applying the dye, I started sanding it back to get that wood to come through. Those three stripes there were unexpected. I'm not really sure where they came from, if it's part of when I cut the wood back in school, or if that's how the wood was produced from the factory, or if that's just a natural part of the wood, but it's pretty unique. Also, that neck I purchased off eBay had a rosewood fretboard on it, and I thought this would look much cooler with an ebony board. So time to fake it till you make it, and here I applied some black dye to the rosewood. Now it's time for the moment of truth. Time to remove the tape. It honestly was a disaster. The dyes leaked through the tape. And while I thought it would be an easy fix with some sanding, the dye went too deep into the wood to sand away. I even tried scraping some off with a box cutter. Nope, this was ruined and there was no way I'd get that intended look. So, change of plans. There was absolutely nothing I could do to get that initially intended look, so I had to think about what else I could do with the instrument in its current state and give a new plan a shot. Sometimes, skill issues like this can be a constraint that guide your creativity to something you'd not have thought of if everything had gone smoothly. I decided to dye all the bodywood black up to the line where it meets the top wood, and then keep a black-red mix for the bevel. The black-red mix on the bevel still provides enough color to highlight that it is a bevel, and the black line separation between the body and the top woods look cool to me. Also, the mismatch of colors that leak through the tape are quite well hidden in the mix of wood grain textures in the bevel. There's also changes in looks in the bevel where you've got the wood grain and the resin adjacent to one another, and the mix of black and red over the top of that helps hide the sins quite nicely. So that's the final design there, and then there was just some more sanding left to do to make sure everything was nice and flat. I also sanded away some of the edges of the red design, like on the body. I thought that gives like a nice little highlight naturally without painting anything shiny or white. So onto the clear coat. You shake the can for nearly 5 minutes and give it a light coat. I must have done around 10 coats on either side. Definitely overkill, but I was worried that the edges wouldn't have enough clear coat on them, as it tends to recede from corners and leave the wood exposed. I found out the hard way that it's going to happen even with 10 coats, but I did a couple of extra coats just along the outside until I felt the entirety of the top, including those edges, was sealed. Also, use a mask unlike me. Okay, so it's nice and shiny now, but see that rough texture? That's colloquially known as orange peel and is a result of using a spray. Getting rid of it turned out to be the biggest hurdle in this build and drove me crazy for about a week. I tried sanding, wet sanding, buffing and polishing, and absolutely nothing worked. So when you sand the clear coat, you get this milky look over the top. As much as I would sand this, it simply wouldn't go away. The frustrating thing was that cleaning this with naphtha would make the milk layer disappear, until that cleaning fluid dried up and then the film was back. The same thing happened with buffing using compound. I found out that respraying your clear coat at least made that milky layer go away, so I was stuck in this loop of trying to get rid of the orange peel, ending up with a milky layer, and then respraying to get rid of that milky layer, but then being stuck with orange peel. I went through my entire spray can of clear coat by trying out ideas to get rid of the milky stuff, then essentially hitting the undo button with another coat of clear once the ideas hadn't worked. The worst thing was that the internet was actually pretty useless in providing helpful advice. See, the internet's actually really good at providing helpful advice for well-established topics. Many minds come together sharing ideas, and with a lot of public attention, it usually means that the good ideas float to the top. They stay relevant. On a niche topic though, so much garbage advice. I saw forum post after forum post about how you never ever sand your top coat. Your top coat should be pristine as it is, straight out of the can. It's such a gatekeeper style comment and it's completely untrue. Many other comments said that the orange peel was a result of a bad spray and that you just need to learn better can control and use thinner coats of clear to avoid it. So I spent lots of time in clear coat trying to perfect my spraying technique just by spraying on scrap wood, only to get the exact same results every time. No matter how thin or thick, how far or close, or how little or much I shook the can up. Now don't get me wrong, I certainly learned that you could get worse results by doing things the extra wrong way, but there was no way that you could avoid getting orange peel out of a spray can in one go. There are also so many posts from our chemical engineering experts in the luthier world talking about how you could never mix different types of clear coat. You could create toxic gases, maybe even explosives, because the hydrochemic chloride will react with the polyurethane oxide, obviously. Well, I was doing this over Christmas. Deliveries were slow and most shops were closed, and I was out of spray and patience. So I ended up buying a completely different type, let alone brand of clear coat, once I'd run out of that initial can from all the experimenting I did earlier. And lo and behold, I'm alive. Anyway, the actual solution. It's just sanding, but you need to sand a lot and go to a super fine grit. First I started with 320 and went all the way up to 3500. So that's doing one pass over the instrument with a 320 grit paper, then 400, then 600, 800, 1000, 1200, 1500, 2000, 2500, 3000, and 3500. Yeah, it took a lot of time. But those lower grits help you get a really smooth top finish, and the finer grits remove the scratches from the lower grits. They remove that milky look, finally. And as you continue working your way up the grits, you see that mirror, shiny, glassy style finish that you were looking for in the first place. It's 100% worth your time. Also, wet sanding with the finer grits helps make sure that you don't pick up loose grains that then scratch your top as they rub between your sandpaper and the top wood. This happened to me a lot, and it was so sad to feel that scraping suddenly happen as you're going through on the finer grits, because then you have to go back a few grits and then buff out that scratch. After that was said and done, I went over the instrument, back, headstock, neck, sides, everything, with a buffing compound and pad that I just got off Amazon. After that, you can see that the look is really starting to come together now, and the shine's being picked up so well just under that garage lighting. I could still see some finer scratches in the surface that you only notice up close or under a really bright light. These are things that you could usually buff out. Now, because I did everything by hand here, including the sanding and the buffing, there will be more of these human mistakes. But these are things that you'll probably only notice yourself. I don't think anybody who sees the instrument will actually pick up on it. And yeah, just seeing how it looks on camera, it's fine. Another problem came up too, as there was some air pockets within the clear coat. And I could only see this after I'd perfectly sanded everything down up to that highest grit. Because when I first sprayed the clear coat, these air pockets were covered by the orange peel. And then as I started sanding away the orange peel, those milky layers covered up even further. So it's only when you get to those really high grits that everything's looking shiny and smooth that then you can see these air pockets in the coat. So this set me back another few days as I tried to sand back down to the actual base coat and then respray the clear coat and hope for the best. And I found that it kind of worked, but another air pocket would form somewhere else. And then later on I realized these air pockets were forming because the edges of the guitar where the clear coat wasn't bonding to, like I was saying earlier, meant that there was pockets for air and also moisture to seep in, especially when I was wet sanding at various parts of the project. Thankfully, they actually make a spray that helps out with this. It's this one here, I'll just put it up on screen. It dissolves your clear coat and the moisture and the air seep out of the hole, and then the clear coat hardens again. It does mean that you have to sand it and get it flat and smooth and shiny again, but it's well worth it. I just wish from all the advice I'd heard online about wet sanding that some warnings existed about moisture seeping into some of the edges where your clear coat might not have bonded fully. So now we're out of the garage and into my room. At this point, I'm just placing all the hardware in. So this is the input jack, the guitar knobs, and then the actual guitar pickups. And yeah, wow, look at this. Like, this is completely unprofessional lighting. There's no video editing or color correction or anything special going on here. This is just raw out of the camera. And you can see how shiny and how reflective the surface is. Once again, all by hand, which means you can do it too. I also wasn't a big fan of how the screws that hold the pickups in were so visible and kind of ugly looking. So I chopped out some of the foam that the pickups came in and then just popped them in the covers. And once all the hardware was in, time to solder it all up. And yes, as an Australian, I say soldering, not soldering. It's the same thing for all my US listeners out there. I haven't used a soldering iron since I was in like year 7 or something, so I was quite apprehensive about doing this, especially on a project as significant as this was to me. I didn't want to burn myself, the guitar, or the house down, so this was a big stress point in the project. So to make it a little easier on myself, I actually laid out all the wiring, all the electronics, and everything in place so that all I needed to do was just drop in some soldering wire, heat it up, and connect the components as per the wiring diagram. I didn't really go one by one in like putting a wire in the right spot, soldering, getting the next wire to the right spot. Everything was set up ready to go before I turned the soldering iron on. So here's what it looks like from a top-down view. Once again, absolutely 0 points here for neatness or cable management. I'm pretty sure I used way too much soldering wire, much more than I needed to. But hey, it gets the job done, right? The wires are connected. This is an example of how the bare minimum can still be good and how anyone can do it. So now that it's hooked up, it was time for the final test. Woo! As you can hear there was a grounding issue. I did have to go back and just one of the connections wasn't great, so I added more soldering wire to it and it was all good. And that's it. That's the story. It's completed now. But yeah, I'm really happy with the results of this. And, you know, the Seymour Duncans, these are going to sound great in any instrument you put them in. The hip shot bridge is super easy to use. Got my action nice and low, my intonation's perfect. The guitar neck, despite being really cheap, is super playable. And I'm happy with how dyeing the actual fretboard came out. All I had to do was scratch out some of the dye off of the inlays so that they shone through. I also think the back looks cool, even if it's not everybody's cup of tea. For the next build, I definitely think I'm going to pick up a little orbital sander or something. That way I'll have an easier time with the sanding process, hopefully less difficulties with the clear coat, and then I can actually attach the buffing pads and buffing compound onto that and get a really shiny finish. I realized that the finish on this guitar It's shiny, but it's not as glossy as some of the other instruments I have. It's certainly gotten more satin since the recording of when I was soldering everything together. Now for YouTube and making videos, that's actually turned out to be great. I love the way the lights picked up on this guitar. It's not too shiny, but it's not dull either. But I think it'd be pretty cool to try and make something that's absolutely blinding. I'm definitely interested in trying to make some more original shapes as well. Maybe something a little less edgy, but still something that's a bit different looking from all the stuff we see released every year by the big brands. So I hope this was helpful. I definitely recommend trying to build a guitar yourself if you've got the time and the patience and willingness to learn. If you're into tech and you've built something like a PC, it's a little bit similar, but there is more work involved, especially when it comes to cutting out some of the wood and using power tools and such. But at the end of the day, it is all kind of one big puzzle if you just sit there and take the time to break down those difficult tasks into smaller, more bite-sized ones. There's certainly nothing about it that takes talent or superhuman ability to pull off, so it's worth an attempt in my book. And I also feel like there's a lot of room to adjust things if you do make a mistake. You don't quite have to start over from scratch if you mess up. So I hope you found this interesting, maybe even inspiring if you're considering building an instrument yourself, and thanks for watching. If you want to see this guitar in action, I've posted a few videos of it already. I'll leave some links in the description or just check out the cards up here, I think. And I hope you have a wonderful day.